Before I start, I just want to let you know that all the products that I mentioned in this video will be in the information box below. Hi, it's Dia. Today we're going to compare coloring with Crayola Colored Pencils and Faber-Castell Polychromos Pencils. What it came down to for me was just coloring with cheap pencils versus coloring with expensive pencils, and if there is actually a difference. I'm using this picture as a reference that I've already painted with watercolors from my latest book, Everyday Magic, and I'm going to start with the Crayola pencils. I selected colors that were as close as possible to the reference photo, and I just started to basically copy the colors that were there. And I did this relatively quickly. I gave myself a half an hour for each set of pencils. I'm not going to do the entire image, but I figured a half an hour was a good idea to see what the differences actually were. And if it took a different amount of time to use the different sets. So first blush using the Crayola pencil. Oh, and I used relatively decent paper. I used textured mixed media paper. And the Crayola pencils, whoop, that's me sharpening, and you're going to hear that a lot with the Crayola pencils. Sometimes also with the Polychromos pencils, but not as much. Now, that brings me to Crayola pencils are hard. Inexpensive pencils have a tendency to be harder because the ratio of pigment to filler is bigger, meaning there's much more filler, comparatively speaking, to the color or the pigment. So you're feeling a lot of wax, and the colors have a tendency to be less vibrant because there is more filler. So that's the first difference. And I could, once I was paying attention, I definitely could tell that the Crayola pencils were a little bit harder to use. Now, this is me talking to after I did both images. I'm speaking over the top of everything. So I did both images already. And after doing them both, I can definitely tell you, you can get great results, but it does take longer with the Crayola pencils. I think that it would take a longer time with any less expensive pencils, but not that much more time. It wasn't an endless disaster of me saying, oh my gosh, I wish I was using another set. I actually like using Crayolas quite a bit. Whoop, and there was the first actual breakage. And I think that did have to do also with the fact that I was going relatively quickly. This isn't a perfect image, it's not perfect coloring, but they are a little bit brittle. Now, that being said, that yellow was beautiful. Now, the first colors that I used for the sparrow were gray, dark gray, and black. The black throughout everything definitely was not as dark as the black in the Polychromos set. And I have a feeling that if I went over, I should maybe even do that and show an image at the end. What I was going to say is if you go over the top of the black of the Crayola with the Polychromos black, I'm pretty sure that you would see a difference. You know what? I'm gonna see if that happens. I'm gonna put a little insert of a video right now. Hold on. So you can see that going over the Crayola black with the Schwarz black makes a difference. I did these three little feathers. Yeah, you can see it's just a more intense color. once again, that being said, the price difference is extreme. The Crayola 100 set on Amazon is $14.99. The Polychromos Faber-Castell Basic Tin for $120 is $277.79. I'm not that quick with math, but that's over $250 difference. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show both pictures side by side. And are there differences? Yes, but I don't know. I'm going to be very interested to hear what you have to say. If you could tell me what you think and which is your favorite, because they did come out different, and I tried to pick as close colors as I possibly could. So let me know below. Sharpening again. The flesh colors, or colors that I was using for this fairy, in the Crayola set, one of them was apricot, one of them was light orange, and they were very, very light. I used the same colors on the big fairy and the little fairy. And as many layers as I put on them, they stayed very light. And in general, the lighter the color, the harder I had a tendency to push to get the color that I thought I wanted, so I would burnish more quickly. So I found out with the Crayola set that burnishing or filling in all the areas of the texture of the paper happened relatively quickly. So if you had several layers and you pushed relatively hard, you were kind of done. I could not go back over unless I used a little turbinoid, because there's basically a lot of wax in those pencils. And because of that, there is a little bit of fallout. So if you're using the pencils and you're laying down a layer and then you go over the top, you're pushing a little bit harder, there's more dust. And I'm assuming that that's because of the extra filler. Now, all that being said, I enjoy using these colored pencils. And especially if I'm coloring in a coloring book or you're coloring in a coloring book, I don't see any reason not to use Crayola or Prang pencils. I can't even think of any other brands that are less expensive off the top of my head. Arteza, Farben. Now, the last two that I mentioned, the Arteza and the Farben, they're not as cheap as the Crayola, but they're still much cheaper than Prismacolor or Polychromos. And Polychromos is more expensive than Prismacolor, and Luminance is more expensive than all of them. Yes, the creaminess and blendability factor goes up as the price goes up. But that being said, Arteza, Farben, those what's the other one? Oh, Castle Art. I don't know how they do it. They put over 90 pencils in a set, and the price is crazy. And once again, I'll put all this information below. And so yes, those are inexpensive sets that are a little bit more than Crayola and totally worth it. So let's just get back to the Crayola for a few minutes. On their dresses, I put down a yellow color first, and then I went over the top with sort of, well, actually the color is called Harvest Gold. And I find that the lighter colors in the set, you even have to work harder for the pigment to show up. So occasionally I had to go a shade darker to get the color that I thought I wanted from the lighter color that I was using. So I used yellow, and then I used Harvest Gold, and then I went over the top of that with light brown. And the light brown sort of looked like what I thought the Harvest Gold was going to look like. So you get the idea. They're not hard to work with. The lead is hard, but it takes longer to get the results that you want for those several reasons. The colors are a bit lighter, they're less pigmented, the blendability is a bit less, but I have to say the colors are vibrant. Now, I'm only using Crayola in this set. They're vibrant, and you can get the results you want, as you can see in this picture. And at the end, you'll see there is a difference, and you'll be able to see it, but not so much where you would say, oh, I would never use these pencils in a million years. They're totally worth the $14.99 for 100 pencils. You can see me working in tiny areas here, and I'm sharpening so much because, first of all, the areas are tiny, and second of all, just like with any colored pencil, you get more accurate results and the ability to do details much better when you have a very sharp pencil. Oh, that's another positive thing about the Crayolas. They hold a point forever. Not forever, but a really long time. And you can see that the point stays sharp, it's easy to use, but since there's more filler and less pigment, it's harder to get the details. So yes, the point stays sharp, but you kind of have to work a little harder. And at the very end, I even went over her hair. I don't remember if it was dark brown or black, just to get the details in. Now this was a, it's called Pink Flamingo, but it's very, it's almost like a fluorescent pink. And I find that the fluorescent colors are harder to color over. But in this case, I was able to color over the top of it a little bit to get more details on the flower. Right here, I was trying to add a little bit of dimension and maybe a little bit of wrinkles to the bottom of her dress and the bottom of the little one's dress. And you can probably tell that it was getting to the point where there were a lot of layers there and it was getting a little bit harder to for those details to show. Now here's where I went over the fluorescent. Let me see, what color was that? Jazzberry Jam. And that did show up. On the raspberry, I used several colors. I used the fluorescent, the flamingo pink, the Jazzberry Jam, red, magenta. So the darker colors, I had more success with the layering. Just about coming to the end of the Crayola picture, and I keep wanting to go back to add little details. And first I went over the edges of her skin with light orange because I just felt like it needed more punch. Then I went over with a darker orange. Then I ended up doing some shadows in black. Oh, and the other thing is the colors are very transparent. I never really got any kind of an opaque coverage at all. And there's there's a good and a bad thing. The opaque lets the color, lets the lines show through. So I didn't have to really go over the details that were already on the page at all. But if I wanted it to be a little bit muted, like I wanted those lines to be a bit muted, I had a hard time with that because some of those lines did show through and the colors really wouldn't mute them at all. So that's about it for the Crayola. And now let's move on to Polychromos. Here it is finished. In my opinion, it looks really pretty, and it doesn't look like it's done with cheap crayons, or pencils, I should say. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the book that the picture is from is Everyday Magic. It's got that fancy bind-o-matic binding. You can take out the picture that you choose, work on it, and then you can either put it back when you're done or not, and then the binding goes right back on. And voila, easy peasy. Now, for the Polychromos pencils, I picked out similar colors, as close as I possibly could to the colors in the Crayola set that I already used on the other picture. And now I'm going to speed this up. Now, right off the bat for the Polychromos pencils, there were more neutrals. So I had more choices, I had more grays, I had more interesting browns. There's a color called, I think it's called Bister. It's sort of like a neutral brown. There's cool browns, there's cool grays, there's warm grays, there's neutral grays. So it was a lot easier to get this bird to look like the reference picture, just because all the nuances seem to be covered in the set. I think that there are less reds and magentas. You know what? I could even be wrong, but I don't know how they had such a variety of the neutrals, sort of like the botanicals, good for animals, things like that. The other thing that I noticed right away, it was much easier with the more expensive pencils to get the depth of color and even cover the area that I wanted to cover. It almost felt like, well, it felt very smooth, and it almost feels sometimes like there's a little tiny brush at the end that's helping the color along. I'm not going to show the whole thing again because I'm pretty much doing exactly the same as I did in the Crayola image. So I'm just going to cut through it a little bit. These pencils hold a point really well too, but I don't think, especially using them one right after the other, not as well as the Crayolas. But since there's more pigment in it, you can get the results you need faster. Meaning you don't have to go over and over and over. And you know what? Doing this also, I realized that one of the reasons you might want to use these if you're a professional is just because you can get so much more detail so much easier with the Polychromos or any of the more expensive, more highly pigmented pencils. Polychromos pencils are also oil-based. Not sure if that matters here though. Now here's the light flesh from the Polychromos set, and interestingly enough, it's a little more intense. So that area right in the center of the face on the other image that stayed light and bright, this is already darker than that. So I had to change the way I colored the skin because already it's darker, and I was trying to make them as similar as possible. So you'll see there's a slight difference. Now this was the medium flesh, and then there was dark flesh. The dark flesh almost seemed like carnation pink, and they were really pigmented, and as you can see here. So I didn't know what I was going to do at this point, and I really didn't know if I liked the way it looked. The other one was slightly more orangey, and this one was definitely more pink. So I came in with orange, and then I didn't like it more. But to make a long story short, it ended up okay. I just had to figure it out. I was, I guess, in the groove of coloring with the Crayola pencils, and I had to adapt because these are much more pigmented. So not only are they more pigmented, but they are more opaque. So as you can see on their faces, I went over their faces just like I did with the Crayola pencils. There was no problem. But their little features now are much more soft and subdued, and I had to go in with a very sharp black and some brown so you could see her eyes, so you could see her mouth. So there were a couple things that I had to readjust and compensate for. It wasn't much. The other thing about Polychromos pencils is that the lead itself is much thicker. So even though the lead is softer in the Polychromos pencils, because the lead is so thick, it does resist breaking. So yes, the Crayola lead is harder, but I can't say that it, I can't say that it's better because of that. You saw me using the yellow, and I pushed hard. It was a little bit brittle, and it cracked. I didn't have any of the Polychromos pencils crack. So the Polychromos pencils also stayed matte for, I would say, most of the area. I think all of the area. It never really got to the point where it was shiny until the very end when I wanted it to be shiny, when I chose to burnish it. The Crayola pencils, some of them were shiny right from the start, especially the lighter colors. But that being said, once again, I always got the appearance or the effect that I wanted to happen. Sometimes it just took me a minute or two longer. So that being said, I finished the basics sooner on the Polychromos pencils. So that allowed me to go back and fuss around a little bit and add details, even on the bird, that I really didn't get a chance to go back and do because I was pretty strict with myself. I went exactly to 30 minutes and then I stopped. So yeah, I was able to finesse it up and make it look a little bit more like, not that either one doesn't look completed. I keep interrupting myself. Sorry about that. It just looks a little bit, maybe the word is polished. I think the Polychromos pencils look a little more polished if you're going to really, really look. If you're going to be drawing and you're going to be selling your work, okay, I can see getting Polychromos pencils or Prismacolors or Luminance or Derwent or any of those expensive sets. There's also the factor of staying power. I have no idea how long the Crayolas will last. I don't know if they're light fast at all. I know the Luminance has the highest rating. I know that Polychromos and Prismas, depending on the color, are good. Now I'm going back to the Crayola set. I'm blending. You just saw me do that on the previous slide with the Prismacolors. The Prismacolors blended easier and there was less fallout. And as you can see, it looks like there was a little bit more detail in the Polychromos. So that's about it. So any last information I can tell you, I'm not quite sure. There's the Polychromos, and to the left is the Crayola. I'm going over a little bit more so you can see the blending as it's kind of happening. You can see right there, when you blend the Polychromos pencils, maybe rather than it getting more muted, it actually gets more intense. So I think that's one of the benefits of more pigment in the pencils. Looking at them side to side, I think the Crayola on the left is a little bit lighter, but that makes sense since there's a little bit less pigment. But I don't know. I like them both. I don't know which one I would pick as a favorite. And once again, I'd love your input to see which one you like better. And at the very end, I'll put close-ups of both. I'm adding more black detail. And once again, the Polychromos is darker, but I don't know if I care for a coloring book. The first one was Crayola, this one's Polychromos. In my humble opinion, I think they both look really nice. Thank you for sticking with me through this video. I had a really good time doing this. Okay, this one is the Crayola. I think it looks pretty. The colors look nice and vibrant. And then this one is the Polychromos. So let me know which one you think. Thank you so much for being here. Tell me which one is your favorite. And I'd love your input. Thank you all so much. If you like this video, do me a favor, give me a thumbs up, possibly even a share. Every time I get a thumbs up or even a comment, it gets put in the feed again and more people get to see my videos. So thank you. You all know who you are, who always comment and like my stuff. I appreciate it so much. I wish I could tell you how much. So once again, thank you. And I will see you soon. Thank you again. Bye.